Karen, we're still pre-live. Welcome, and thank you all for joining us here this evening. Before we get into the agenda and content for the meeting, we want to acknowledge the land. Our elders have shared that it is important to acknowledge the land where we gather and the first peoples who traditionally lived here. It shows respect for people, their contributions, and their ways of knowing, which are reflected through the stories and songs that have lived on this land for thousands of years. We are making this acknowledgement at the beginning of our gathering today to further demonstrate our commitment to work together as a community in laying the foundations for reconciliation through education. We would like to acknowledge the traditional territories and oral practices of the Blackfoot Nations, which include the Siksika, the Bigani, and the Gaine. We also acknowledge the Tsuut'ina and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, the Métis Nation, Region 3, and all people who make their homes in Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. This agenda outlines the areas that will be covered this evening. That includes the introductions, which we'll do briefly, rationale for the plan, community statistics, an overview of the changes proposed, enrollment projections, school naming, school utilization information, as well as new registration and transportation, along with the timelines. For introduction, I want to first introduce myself and then introduce others on the list in the order. My name is Latosia Campbell-Walters, and I'm the Director of Planning with the CBE. Other representatives here tonight are Nancy Close, Trustee Wards 11 and 13, Charlene May, Trustee Wards 12 and 14, Danny Breton, Superintendent, Facilities and Environmental Services, Ann Ard, Director, Area 5, Mike Nelson, Director, Area 5, Darlene Unruh, Acting Director, Area 6, Laurie Cullen, Principal, Auburn Bay School, Michael Hebington, Principal, Riverbend School, Tracy Cohan, Principal, Sherwood School, Kim Manser, Principal, Andrew Sebald School, and Connor Mercreech, Planning Analyst. Next slide, please. Why is a plan needed? Construction progress on three new schools, 2 schools in Auburn Bay and 1 school in Mahogany, currently indicates the possibility of an opening in September 2022. We hope to confirm the opening date shortly. If a September 2022 opening is possible, an adjustment in the boundaries and designation for students living in the communities of Auburn Bay, Seton, and Mahogany is necessary. The plan we develop, and which we are about to share with you this evening, will allow as many students to attend school closer to home. The rationale for the plan. Student accommodation decisions are guided by CBE's planning principles. The accommodation plan aligns well with several of these principles, such as allows for students to attend school closer to home, provides program continuity from kindergarten to grade 12, provides equitable access for all students to quality learning environments and choice of programs, and uses space and resources effectively. We'll now turn over to Connor, who will take us through the detailed plan.
Hi, Latosha. Thanks. My name is Connor McGreesh, and I'm a planning analyst for the CVE. So what I'll run through with you today is a few community statistics, and we'll review the accommodation plan you would have got or maybe seen in a letter already sent out. So to start with, we'll start with looking at the three communities we're speaking about today. So Auburn Bay is a community that is pretty much fully built out. Most the entire population of Auburn Bay is now living there. It's considered fully built out with a population of about 17,500 people, and that was a couple of years ago when the city last did a census. And it has 3 school sites, so Auburn Bay Elementary, and then the elementary school #2, and then the middle school. Auburn Bay community will now have over 5 schools. So that includes 3 CBE and 2 Calgary separate school divisions, so the Calgary Catholic School Boards. So within Auburn Bay, there's going to be a lot of capacity for students for teaching and learning between the 2 boards. Mahogany community is about 37% built out, and it's growing slower than Auburn Bay has in the past. The pace of development is a bit slower there. It also has 3 school sites, 2 elementary, including the new Mahogany school site, and a middle school. And as for Seton, it is another community that's early in development. It's about 5% built out, but it's also going to be a fairly large community, a little bit more populous than Auburn Bay. And Seton also has 3 school sites. It has a future middle, future elementary, and the current high school, Joan Cardinal Schubert. So when we look at the accommodation plan, this first slide here focuses on the school grades and how they will change between 2022 and 2023. On the following slides, we'll discuss more how the communities move in between these schools as we change designations. So for Auburn Bay in 2022, this school would remain a K4. So there's no actual grade change next year. Auburn Bay #2 will open as a K4, and Auburn Bay Middle will open as a 5 to 8, and Mahogany School also opening as a K4. Then we look at the second year of opening, 2023 to 2024, and the schools will see a grade configuration change. So that would be changing to K5 at Auburn Bay, K5 at Auburn Bay #2, and in step, Auburn Bay Middle would change to grade 6 to 9. At the same time, Mahogany, also kind of in line with those other elementary schools, would change to K to 5 as well. And we'll see the why for that in a moment on the next slide. Next slides. For now, looking at the map, so you would have seen these in the letter, hopefully, but the designations here will see Auburn Bay School, the current Auburn Bay School, will have a larger portion of the community, the green section, will remain designated to the school. And the purple portion of the community, slightly smaller area, will be designated to Auburn Bay Elementary School #2. And the entire community of Auburn Bay will be designated to Auburn Bay Middle School. For Mahogany, it will be K4, as I mentioned, in 2022, and then K5, and that'll be the whole community designated to the Mahogany School. For Seton, we will see the schools Seton redesignated to Cranston School, K5, and then 6 to 9 for Dr. George Stanley. On the next slide, we look at the middle school. It's a little more simple, not quite as many boundaries on this one, but Auburn Bay and Mahogany, all community designated to the new Auburn Bay Middle, with all of Seton designated to Dr. George Stanley School. So I mentioned in a previous slide why we're going to open the schools and sorry, Karen, you can go to the next slide, please. Why we're going to open the schools K4 in 2022 and then expand them to grade 5. So the main purpose for that is it just avoids too many transitions or excess transitions for students as they move through the grades. So this slide helps, I think, show that. So you can follow, for example, we'll look at that top graphic. So if you're a grade 4 student currently in 2021, you're in the blue, you're going to Auburn Bay or potentially Andrew Sibbald School for grade 4. Then, if you go to the next line for the next school year, you would transition directly into the middle school. And then as the grade configurations change between the elementary and the middle, you would just remain, that student would remain in the middle school. And they would just transition to grade 6. And there they would continue on to the end of grade 9. So you transition from your elementary school to your middle school, and that's it. But if you were in grade 3, for example, you would transition to the new Auburn Bay School number 2, the new elementary. And to avoid transitioning the next year right away into a middle school, we've built in that grade configuration change year. And now that same student has 2 years in the new Auburn Bay Elementary School number 2. So they have 2 years, they're not transitioning to the new school and then again to the middle school. So that grade expansion allows that student a little more time in the new school and avoids too many transitions and too much disruption in their learning. And that same rationale applies to all these schools. It's the same for Mahogany. If you are currently in Riverbend School, you would move, if you're in Riverbend in grade 4, you would transition to the new Auburn Bay Middle, and you would just continue there until the end. So hopefully that slide helps highlight why we went with that grade configuration, delayed grade configuration change. Now we'll look at the projections for the schools involved, and I'll talk through what it's going to look like for population in those schools. So in Auburn Bay, we have a drop in 2022. So next year, Auburn Bay is going to see a pretty significant drop in enrollment, as so many of those students in that purple section that we just looked at transition to the new elementary school. But it's also a drop because the school doesn't quite yet expand to grade 5 as they do in 2023. So they drop in 2022 as a K4, but then they get some of those students back in 2023 when they expand to a K5. You can go to the next slide, Karen. Thanks. For Auburn Bay School number 2, it's going to open as a K4 in 2022, as we know, before expanding to grade 5 in 2023. Mahogany enrollment is expected to increase from the community of Mahogany. So this goes back to why Auburn Bay Elementary has a larger portion of the community. That's because we know that Mahogany community is going to likely outgrow the space in Mahogany School. It's a very large community. There's one, right now there's one other school, a Calgary Catholic school in Mahogany, and it's currently full, and they are overflowing students out of the community. So we know that there's a lot of students in Mahogany, and we expect that they will be able to, when there's not enough room at Mahogany School, they'll be able to attend school at Auburn Bay Elementary School number 2. Now this has a few advantages. It keeps them in line with the cohort that they're going to join with up in Auburn Bay Middle in a couple of years. So if you move into the community in grade 3, you'll attend Auburn Bay School number 2 if Mahogany is full, for example, and you would continue with your peers at Auburn Bay School into the middle and rejoin your community peers from Mahogany in the Auburn Bay School as well. So that's how we foresee future potential overflows for Mahogany at Auburn Bay 2. And now looking at the middle, so this is a reasonably optimistic projection for Mahogany for grade 6 to 9. There's not a lot of actually past examples of new communities, like a new community like Mahogany, being designated right next door for middle school. So this is, this is good news for Mahogany. Lots of times schools like Auburn Bay previously had to travel a ways to get to their designated school, but Mahogany will from now be designated kind of right next door. So our market share or our capture rate of students into the CBE will increase in future years because of that convenience and proximity of the designation. Now, long term, you can see as you go into future years, the projection for Mahogany does exceed that space at Auburn Middle School. So knowing that their community of Mahogany is so large and that they will likely need additional space, that when we get to that point, if Mahogany does not get approved for new school by then, we would find an additional overflow designation outside of the Auburn Bay community. When I talk about new school, in terms of when we could possibly expect a middle school Mahogany, we don't know, but currently the middle school Mahogany is ranked number 7th in priority on our capital plan from this last spring, from spring 2021. So Mahogany last year, the year before, the 2020 plan, they were actually number 12. So in 1 year, they've gone from 12th ranking to 7th ranking for new school construction priority. So as this community grows, I suspect their ranking will continue to be high compared to other demands of the CVE. So if we get some more new schools built, we're hopeful that Mahogany, and hopefully before we get to the situation in future years where we need to overflow, we may see an approval by that point. So that would be great. So fingers crossed for that. And the Mahogany school, this projection is based on Mahogany changing to K5 in 2023, and we do expect there will be an overflow needed for the Mahogany community. As I mentioned already a couple times, Mahogany is a very large community. There's going to be a lot of people. There's going to be a lot of people living there. It is growing out a bit slower than some of the other communities in the area, but nonetheless, it is very large. So we do suspect that an overflow will be required shortly after opening. And then you can go to the next slide, Karen. So Cranston School. So now we'll pivot a little bit here, and we'll focus on the Seton designation now. So Cranston's home area, so that's the blue you see on the slide. They're not expected to remain at the current 2022 level. We're actually expecting the population at the Cranston School home area to decline over the next few years. The reason being is that north portion of Cranston community has been developed, and it was the first to develop, and it's been developed for a while. So we're expecting a slow decline in the home area over the next few years, which makes ample space for Seton community, and there are growing needs into the future. And when we look at Dr. George Stanley School, the Dr. George Stanley School projection is stable from the home area, so that blue is pretty stable. There's no substantial increases or decreases in enrollment. This means that over the long term, there is a predictable amount of space available for Seton students to be designated there in the future. Now I'm going to hand it over to Danny Breton to share some information about transportation.
Good evening. Yes, our transportation manager unfortunately wasn't available tonight, so I'm filling in for her. Transportation and walk zones, as indicated on the slide here, no busing is anticipated for the elementary schools in Auburn Bay, so both the existing as well as the Auburn Bay Elementary School number 2 that's projected to be opening in September. In regards to Mahogany School and Auburn Bay Middle, for those two, the walk zones will be posted this spring because we still need to work those through, and so information will be available. Let me underscore that we've got a pre-registration ability during the spring that comes up every year, and the ability to cancel by the end of September without any cost. And so if you find yourself to be outside of the walk zone and are interested in that opportunity, please sign up for it. Again, there is no risk involved, and if for whatever reason you choose to turn that around and not use the transportation service, you can do that and cancel without any fee up until the end of September. And there are reminders that go out to make sure that folks recognize that point. I'd also like to underscore where it says that students are eligible for transportation to their designated school if they live beyond the walk zone. And for elementary schools, that distance that we look at is 1.6 kilometers. And for middle schools, it's 1.8 kilometers. That's the distance. Of course, recognizing though that the Education Act does have a 2.4 kilometer limit. So it is a little bit longer, but we've heard parents say how, you know, for the younger students, it's more important to be closer to school because they've got shorter legs. But in saying that, of course, it does mean that there's a difference between the mandated versus non-mandated fee for those who are requesting a service that goes above and beyond what the legislation states. But again, in saying that, for these last 2 years, we've been fortunate enough, because of the diminished ridership due to the pandemic, to actually be able to offer transportation at no fee. But certainly anticipate at some point in time, things will pick up again, and then we'll need to continue to be charging a fee. So with that, I am now going to hand it over to Education Director Mike Nelson.
Thanks, Danny, and also thank you, Connor and Latocia. I'm just going to cover a few points. I do want to share with you that there will be opportunities for questions. So if you have questions, be jotting them down, and in a few minutes we'll open up the comment box or the chat window, and you'll be able to put in your questions in that chat window, and we'll try to answer them at the end of the presentation, which will probably just be another 2 to 3 minutes. In regards to school naming, school names are determined by our Board of Trustees, and on October 17th, the outgoing Board of Trustees actually decided, following input from the community, that the first elementary school in Mahogany would be called Mahogany School. The board selected this name after engaging with stakeholders, so the trustees, parent, community, and CB administration, and work is underway for the naming of both the Auburn Bay Middle School and the second elementary school in Auburn Bay. In regards to new school registration, so this year the CBE is moving for its regular programs, and specifically for around kindergarten and students designated to the CBE, to an online registration. It will involve putting in your address into a form, and it'll be presented with your designated school to register. So for example, if you live in Mahogany for kindergarten, it would say Mahogany School, or in the case of Auburn Bay, it will say something to the effect of potentially Auburn Bay Elementary, and you'll be able to register. Do apologize on the slide, there's a slight error. It says also current students will be automatically registered in their new schools for 2022-2023, not 2024. So what that means is if you're currently at Riverbend or Sherwood School, your next year designated school will automatically happen, and as a parent you don't have to do anything. But if you're a parent and you have a child that's in kindergarten, then you'll have to register them, and you'll use the online form this year. So just a little bit about next steps. So the virtual session and idea boards will provide an opportunity for families to get their questions answered and to share their comments. So we have the presentations today and Wednesday. Starting on November 30th to December 1st, we'll have idea boards are open. You can post, and answers will be posted. There will be 3 boards, 1 for each community. So Auburn Bay will have a board, Mahogany will have a board, and Seton will have a board. And that way you can give feedback on the plan or ask questions there. And then the final decision on what is happening will be communicated on December 15th. This way families will have boundary and registration information as we enter the winter break. In speaking with our principals, we know there have been already a few questions. We've heard that there have been inquiries if we could open Auburn Bay Middle School with grade 9 students. So as Connor explained, historically, new middle schools open without grade 9 to allow current grade 8 students to finish at their current school. We try not to move students for just 1 year, and again the next year. So in this case, we're trying not to move students to the middle school for 22-23 for the grade 9 year, and then on to JCS for 2023-24. However, this is something we may be able to consider, so if you have thoughts on that, please post your thoughts regarding this topic on the idea board for your specific community. Similarly, we may anticipate that some questions from the current grade 8 families living in Seton who attend Nichols School may want to consider attending Dr. George Stanley for grade 9 before moving to JCS for high school. So if that's feedback you want us to hear, please post that on the idea boards before December 7th. Sometimes we have people, so if I live in Mahogany and my child is in Riverbend School for grade 5 for grade 6, how will they be designated next year? So they'll be automatically enrolled in the new Auburn Bay Middle School for grade 6 and 7 for the 2022-23 school year. Same thing, my child's currently attending Andrew Sibbald or Nickel or Riverbend, Sherwood. Can they continue attending that school? Students will be automatically enrolled in the new school. There may be, in rare exceptional circumstances, that a parent would need to share with the school principal to determine best placement. So in rare circumstances, a parent may say, can my child stay? I'll give you an exceptional circumstance example. When we opened another new school in the south, we had a student who was to go to the new school for another 2 years. In that case, the student was blind and they had spent the last 3 years understanding that environment. So we worked with that family and made the decision that they could stay. That would be a really rare case. The vast majority of students are expected to go to their new designated school because we're trying to maximize our resources, and we feel very thankful to this opportunity to open new schools. We want to open them with their designated students. So we may have people out there sharing they're currently attending a different school or a school district, but are interested in attending schools such as Mahogany, Auburn Bay, or Cranston. So at this time, as I shared, we believe that kindergarten and new designated students will register through a new online form process, assuming they live in the specific school's boundary and are considered a student of the CBE based on the Education Act and administrative regulations. That means you live in the school and that both parents are not Catholic. In that case, you would be designated to the Catholic system. So if you live in those areas, you'll be able to register. If your child is, let's say, in an older grade, then most often when registration opens on the 17th, you can send in your registration then, but a lot of that also happens once the principal is in place. Remember, we don't work on a first come, first served basis. We anticipate there being room in the first year for all those people that are designated to these schools. I think at this time, we're going to take some questions.
Okay, I see a couple questions already. The first one, there's a comment, so I'll move to the second here. When will we find out what programs and options will be available at the new Auburn Bay Middle School? Will there be sports teams, French, band?
Most often when we open a new school, the principal will gather some feedback via the students. So I'll back up a little bit quickly. Most likely we'll know who the principals are for these schools in around March, and then those principals will get to connect specifically at the middle school with the students currently at Nickel and the communities where they've been overflowed without having middle school, and get an understanding of what courses the students are taking now, and then they'll resource the school the best they can to meet the needs of the courses that the students want. In regards to sports teams, my experience with other middle schools is that they usually offer a similar complement to the middle schools in the area, so they're probably similar to Dr. George Stanley, where you have sports teams, a band program, and other extracurricular or co-curricular activities. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you. The next question, I have 2 children currently attending Auburn Bay School. My eldest child is in grade 3 and will be going into grade 4 next year. If I choose to keep him there for his last year, would he be on a waiting list when it's time for him to go into grade 5?
So if your child's in grade 3 at the Auburn Bay School, And I'm assuming what you're saying is you're now going to be designated to Auburn Bay 2. The expectation is that they would go to the new Auburn Bay school. I apologize if I'm not understanding the question.
Okay, the next question. Can students stay at the current Auburn Bay school if their childcare requirements are such that they are looked after closer to that school than the new Auburn Bay school that is within the new boundary? For example, if the day home looks after them is closer to the current school than the new school.
I don't know if I'm answering this one or Latosia or Danny.
So as per the previous response you gave, Mike, I think what folks are asking about is if their child is in a grade from kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and they are now designated to the new Auburn Bay Elementary School, so number 2. Is there a possibility for those considerations to be an exception that you were discussing, and for that student to stay within the current Auburn Bay Elementary School where they're at? And unfortunately, as per Mike's response, in those cases, what we're looking to do again is to ensure that the pressures that are being felt at Auburn Bay School are taken care of, and that we now are able to fill and get the critical mass of students within the Auburn Bay Elementary School number 2 to be able to operate that program and offer the full variety of programming and richness and the richness of programming variety, I should say, that having a full school brings with it. And so in those cases, the expectation again would be that the students will transition to the second elementary school.
That was going to be my answer to Superintendent Breton, but I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page. I see the question around playgrounds at the new Auburn Bay Elementary K-5 school, and I'll probably lean to the planning team on that one as well.
Right. So unfortunately, the grant that existed for a brief period of time under the previous government for the construction of playgrounds has been rescinded, and so there will not be a playground. And so this then brings back the previous model whereby parents can fundraise to have a playground ultimately put into the new school.
All right, there's another question here. If overutilization occurs as per your forecast, what plans do you have in place to accommodate all students? For example, trailers, online learning, etc.
I can answer that one. Connor here again. So as I mentioned in the forecast, if Auburn Bay Middle, for example, with Auburn Bay and Mahogany both designated there, reaches a point where there's no more space, what we would look at doing is, as I mentioned, an overflow. So that would mean some students from Mahogany would not be able to attend the Auburn Bay Middle, and there would be a second designation. So if we got to that point some year down the line, as Mike kind of mentioned, we're not really first come, first serve school board. So how we handle that is through lottery process. And I think there was another kind of question late, maybe right after that actually. But if there is, will the students from Mahogany having to go to Auburn Bay be based on location? So I think that was maybe, I think that is tied to also if and when Mahogany goes into a potential overflow situation, Mahogany Elementary, I mean, because there's no room as a K-4 school. Those students who need to be overflowed to Auburn Bay number 2, that would also be through the lottery process. And you can find information about that on the CBE website. We have a page dedicated to the lottery. But in a broad sense, how it works is the lottery first prioritizes students who have siblings in the school and who are in the walk zone, followed by prioritizing students who are in the walk zone but don't have siblings in the school, and students who have siblings in the school and who are outside the walk zone. And then the final priority on that lottery list is students who don't have siblings and live outside the walk zone. So if that's a bit much to understand through my explanation, you can see the lottery information on the website. But you know, we're not anticipating it to be Mahogany to be full next year. So that is something we will come back up to the community with if and when that population, the demand for the programs at the school exceeds the space available.
Thank you, Connor. Maybe I'll just add quickly, I did note that there's a question about the online learning, and certainly CBE Learn now offers that grade 1 through grade 12 and will continue to our knowledge to be available into the future, so long as there continues to be a demand for it. And certainly there's quite a bit of demand for it this year. So that is something that can be considered for parents who might be interested in the online opportunities.
Thanks, Danny and Connor. Next question here. My child is currently attending grade 3 at Auburn Bay School. We are now in the new K-4 school zone. Does my child have to move to the new designated school? I have a sibling who will be registering in kindergarten in 2022-2023. Will she be required to register at the new K-4 school in Auburn Bay?
Hi, short answer, yes. So while the younger sibling registers for kindergarten, they will register at the new location, the new Auburn Bay number 2. So this also, you know, having your grade 3 student would transition over to Auburn Bay number 2 for grade 4. They would be there with their younger sibling who's down there in kindergarten. And they would also remain in 2023 for grade 5, because that's the year the school expands. So your child would have 2 years in the same school, Auburn Bay number 2, with their younger sibling.
Thanks, Connor. Can CBE consult with families of students currently in grade 8 in Auburn Bay and Mahogany to determine whether they would rather have their students move to the new Auburn Bay Middle School for grade 9 in 2022-23 or stay at Nickel or Sherwood?
I think we've already addressed that a little bit. Mike addressed it in his questions, that is something that we could consider. So again, put it into those idea boards, let your voice be heard, and then that's something that planning and the area office would come back out with and look at next steps to gather more maybe individual input from parents directly from those grade 8 parents directly.
Okay, the next question. We were with Auburn Bay School for K-1. We are attending CBE Learn for grade 2 this year. Are we able to move to the new Auburn Bay 2 school for grade 3 onwards?
So yes, if you're designated to that school at the end of the school year, you could move your registration. CBE Learn is kind of like an alternative program, and families can always, after that year, move back to their designated school.
Okay, and will students from Mahogany having to go to Auburn Bay be based on location?
So as Connor here, I kind of addressed that one a little bit. I think that's related to how the overflow would work. So, but if you were the person that asked that question and that wasn't quite right, that didn't capture or understand your question, you can maybe post some clarification. But students going to Auburn Bay would be based, if it's in an overflow, there would be a lottery, and it's sometimes based on your proximity and those other factors that I discussed.
All right, there's a question here. It looks like the poster has children at Maple Ridge, but they're residents of Mahogany, and they're asking, how will these students be prioritized after finalizing numbers of students coming from Riverbend?
So I think I can jump in here and then Connor will come in. So what I understand from that question is your child is going to the science alternative program. So you would basically redesignate yourself and transfer back to Mahogany. And in the first couple of years, we expect that Mahogany will have room for all residents. So you would have space. As Connor shared in the graph, in the upcoming years, they'll get to a point where we'll hit capacity and the school would have to go to lottery. But you're a CBE resident, so you could go back to your designated school. Connor, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you got it. And I noticed the next couple questions are in the same vein. My student or my child is currently at an alternative program, but we live in Auburn Bay or Mahogany. How can we ensure we're able to attend the new school? So I don't know if maybe you or possibly one of the other area directors could maybe speak to the transfer process and how they would go about if there's a transfer process involved in going back to their designated regular program school, or do they just register online?
I believe that they would actually let their designated school, or excuse me, they would let their current alternative program know that they want to go back to their designated school, and then they would also, that school would also work with them at communicating to their designated school. So if we use the Maple Ridge example, let the administration at Maple Ridge know that you no longer want to attend their school and you want to return to your designated school, which in the example was given would be Mahogany, and in our student information system, they would be able to, redesignate you to that school, but you should also contact Mahogany, let them know that you're returning as well, and they'll make sure that that is done. And I'm going to add on to there, so we would expect that in late March, April, we'll be able to communicate how you could be in touch with the principal and the admin secretary for that new school. Even though the school hasn't opened yet, we will have them most likely housed in a south school with their own office as they wait for the school to be completed.
All right, next question. Is the registration process the same for kids currently attending alternate schools like Lake Bonavista Montessori?
I think Mike kind of covered that one in his last little bit there.
Thank you, Connor.
I'm just going to add, what we'll do is, because I think we're sharing information back, when we share information back in December, we'll make sure that, because we're seeing a theme, that there's clear instructions for those families that are alternative programs that want to return to their designated community school, and what process for them to follow in this winter, spring of 2022.
Thanks. And can you speak to children with IPP and or psychoeducational needs? What program capacity is being considered for the new Mahogany School? Have you been able to benchmark the needs and match with estimated services?
Every school has students that have IPPs. Every school has students that need specific personalized learning. In regards to psychoeducational supports, all those supports actually flow through our area office. So all the schools in the area have those supports. So if your child's on IPP and they go to that school, then one of the important pieces will be the new administration having communication with their current school, understanding the needs of the child so that we can have the best transition possible.
All right, and there's a question here asking, can you address planning issues? See that Mahogany has projected largest population, yet the fewest amount of planned schools.
Yeah, I can talk to that a little bit, and I don't know if Danny would have any follow-up, but as the capital plan process works and how we CBE request schools is, the schools are ranked, as I mentioned previously, and they're ranked on things like the number of preschool-age children in the community, the number of students in the community attending CBE schools, among other factors. And That's what gets them placed on the capital plan. So as a student, or as a community rather, built out, more students are attending schools, they start to rank higher because their need for a school is greater than a community like comparatively to Mahogany, which is still small. I mentioned it was 37% built out. 37% built out. There's a lot of preschool students, but not a lot of students attending CBE. So they tend to rank a little bit, they were ranking lower. But as a school gets built out, or as a community gets built out like Mahogany, you know, have your first elementary school, the community will continue to grow, more students will continue to come into the CBE, and that middle school will continue to rank high until it gets approved, at which point it gets built. So I hope that kind of answers what you're getting at, that it has a planned school right now, but there are other school sites in the community. So we have one school almost built, almost ready to open, but there are other sites for that future need as the community grows.
Thank you, Connor. That was a good summary there. And again, I will underscore what Connor just said at the end there. We do have another elementary school site in Mahogany. We do have another site also in Mahogany for middle school. However, we don't start making the requests for those schools until the population is there. Why is that? And the reason behind that is because the way school jurisdictions are funded, we're funded on a per student basis, not on a per school basis. So opening a school that would be underutilized would then be drawing resources, taking away money from other schools and impacting those other schools. So the beauty of the cycle, though, that we're in is that if the plan is reviewed on an annual basis and approved by the Board of Trustees according to those criteria that takes into consideration the students within that community. And so then very rapidly a school within a growing community can see its priority rise rapidly, just as, again, Connor was talking about how the Mahogany Middle School was 12th in a previous year, and now this last year's plan, it was up to 7, so it had already jumped 5 positions.
Okay, the next question is asking, if the timeline doesn't allow for Auburn-based school number 2 to open next year, will kids be moved from the current school for just one grade, grade 5, before going to the middle school for grade 6?
I can speak to that one as well. So as we kind of indicated in the letter, and I think earlier in this presentation, we're anticipating a September opening date. But if for some reason there is a delay, we would likely look at a contingency plan. We wouldn't be scrapping this plan altogether, but we would find a way to possibly temporarily house students who would be moving to the new location. That's something we've done in the past when schools have been delayed. We found a temporary spot for them, and then when the new school opens, whether it be a week or 2 weeks later, those students would just lift and shift into the new school when it's ready.
All right, so the next 2 questions seem to be about timing. So the first one, is there an idea of the bell start times for the middle school? And the second one is, do you know what the hours would be for, the school hours would be for the Auburn Bay number 2 school?
Right, so those determinations will be occurring in the spring. Notwithstanding the fact that, for example, the Auburn Bay Second Elementary School will not have a need to, as far as we anticipate, for transportation. Well, correction, no, that was for the, I think it was for one of the other schools. My apologies. But anyhow, either way, transportation is really what drives bell times. And so what I guess I was getting at is, even if you don't have large yellow buses going to a school, there may be need for specialized transportation going to that school. And so because of how we pay for a bus for a fixed amount per year, irrespective of how many runs it does, we try to maximize the number of runs per day so that's to minimize the overall costs on the system and ultimately with fees that have to be charged. So all that to say is that, again, Later this spring, the bell times will be looked at and made known.
Okay, the next question, we moved to Seton Community 2 years ago. Prior to that, we were residents of Auburn Bay. My eldest child will be going into their last year at Auburn Bay School come 2022-2023. If I choose to keep my child there for their last year, will my child be on a waiting list for the Cranston School?
The simplest answer is no. Cranston School will be your designated school.
Okay, thank you. And I think the last, oh, there might be another one in the queue, but this question here, I'm not sure if we want to add to it, but I think it may have been covered. It's about how likely a September opening for all 3 new schools would be. The progress on the 2 schools in Auburn Bay seems a bit slow, 10%, 17% as of the latest updates.
So maybe I'll speak to that one. Alberta Infrastructure are currently giving us very positive indicators for the opening of those 3 schools in September 2022. Based on our own experience, we have opened 27 schools over the past 5 to 6 years. Our own assessment of the progress on those schools corresponds with their assessment. So we are also in agreement that the likelihood is very high that they will be able to complete the buildings in time, and we'll have time then to convert those buildings into schools and have them ready for students on September 1st.
Thanks, Danny. The last question I'm seeing here right now is, will kindergarten be half or full days at both Auburn Bay and both Auburn and Mahogany?
That decision hasn't been made. Most likely the principal would consult with the community, or at least consult with what's happening at the current schools that students are going from these communities. As I said, we haven't named the principals yet.
Thank you, and I don't see any more questions in the queue right now. I think that's all of them.
So if we get a few more questions, happily take them, but without any more questions, I just want to thank everybody for their participation and excellent questions. We are recording this session, so it will be posted tomorrow. We encourage you to share any additional thoughts or questions you have on the idea boards, specifically those pieces some people were asking around the grade 9. And those questions about kindergarten, or we want these type of programs, at least give that input, and when we hire the principals, we'll happily share that with them. We will circulate an email to all families in Auburn Bay, Mahogany, and Seton tomorrow with links to tonight's presentation. In the idea boards. We do truly value your feedback and want you to know it will be considered as we make decisions, and just want you to enjoy the rest of your evening. It's end of November and still pretty warm out there, so thank you very much.